Hello and welcome to I Talk to Ghosts. I'm your haunted host, Jennifer, a spirit medium and a teller of ghost stories. And tonight I have both for you, dear listener, a little bit of spooky and a little bit of spiritual. First, I have for you a few ghost stories about haunted coffins. After that, well, have you ever wanted to attend a séance? You can do so virtually by joining me at my séance table, where I will impart a spirit message for someone listening to this episode. And since you're attending, this message could be for you. Speaking of spirits, I have started a supplemental podcast called The Spirit Parlor, and I post episodes every Tuesday on this same channel that you are listening to I Talk to Ghosts. So if you'd like to spend a little more time with me and chat about all things metaphysical, give it a listen. But first, settle in for some ghost stories. The coffins are creaking open right now. One of my uncles has a very interesting business. His primary job is making coffins. His coffins are beautifully engraved and made of great quality wood, mahogany, sandalwood, teak. His warehouse is conveniently right next door to his home. I recall one night in my 20s when I visited him and spent the night at his house. Late that evening, I was awoken and disturbed by a banging noise that was coming from the coffin warehouse. I got out of bed to investigate, and I found my uncle awake and watching TV quietly. I asked him why he was still awake at such a late hour. He replied that he was waiting for a phone call and said I should go back to sleep. I agreed, but I mentioned the loud banging and knocking that had woken me up. What was that? He gave me the smallest of smiles and said, don't worry, that will stop soon." Not quite understanding what he meant by waiting for a phone call related to a banging or knocking, I left him for the night, and the noise did stop about 10 minutes later, followed by a phone call. I could hear him speaking softly, yes, I'll have the teakwood for you ready tomorrow," and then he hung up. In the morning, as family and coworkers gathered for breakfast, one of his workers told him the teakwood coffin was ready to be delivered to the funeral parlor. Still curious about the previous night's commotion, I again asked my uncle about the noise I heard. My uncle and my father looked at each other, and finally my dad offered this. "Well, whenever someone dies, the deceased always knock on a coffin that they choose, and then call your uncle to let him know which one they want. Usually after knocking and banging, there comes the phone call. And it has been happening for the last 20 years. And my uncle is still running his coffin-making business to this day." My grandmother and grandfather bought a house in 1942. They had only been married 4 months, and they were very happy to finally have a house of their own. It was a beautiful 2-story home and was about 60 years old at the time they purchased it. The house had a few grandiose features. When you walked through the front door, there were 2 big parlor rooms on both your right and left, and the house also boasted a nice-sized basement. My grandmother absolutely loved her new home, to the point that she felt nothing could ever make her leave it. After a long day of moving all their furniture in, they went to bed. The next morning, my grandmother was outside planting flowers when a woman from down the street approached her and introduced herself. They talked for about an hour or so about the neighborhood and the town. The neighbor woman was about to excuse herself when she said quietly, "You do know the history of your home, right?" My grandmother said no and was interested in finding out. The neighbor started telling her about the old funeral home that used to be her new house. My grandmother was startled to hear this. After the neighbor left, she went inside to look around. She finally realized why the two parlors were so big. They had been viewing rooms for the deceased. This frightened her. My grandfather came in from the yard and found my grandmother in one of the parlors still walking around and thinking. She told him about what the neighbor woman had said about their home, and he said, "Oh, I don't believe that. That's just neighborhood gossip." That night, though, my grandfather couldn't sleep. He walked downstairs into one of the parlors, and he sat down to listen to a news broadcast. After about an hour, he became tired, so he thought he would go to bed. He got up, turned off the radio, and walked to the stairs. As he came out of the parlor, he was stopped by what he thought was the sound of a strong howling wind coming from out of the kitchen. The next thing he saw frightened him beyond belief. A ghostly pine casket with a woman inside it rolled through the hallway and stopped right in front of him. He let out a scream of terror that woke my grandmother, who shot out of bed and ran to him. She saw him standing there in absolute shock. She called out to him in a panic, "What's wrong?" All he could reply was, "I want out of this house. I want out." So they packed their things and went to stay with family about 10 miles away in the next town. They arrived at the family's house and told them about what occurred. The next day, my grandmother and grandfather and their family, they packed up all their things and moved out that very day. Hello and welcome back to I Talk to Ghosts. I have a message from the spirits this evening, so thank you for joining me at my séance table. As I call a spirit close tonight, I'm working with the herb wormwood. Wormwood is said that the scent of it can help boost your psychic abilities. And it is said if you burn wormwood in a graveyard, you will summon a spirit to come communicate with you. If you keep it near you as a bit of a talisman or part of a charm, it's a very good protective herb to keep negative energies away from you. So I'm going to clear my mind and call a spirit close. My intention is for this spirit to come close with a message for someone listening to the podcast. Tonight I have someone's sister coming close. She's showing me she really loved baking. Easter seemed to be a bit of a celebration highlight for her. She just loved the colors and the spring imagery, and she would bake a rabbit cake every Easter. She's admitting she had a little bit of a prickly personality. She says she just really found comfort in controlling situations, and tendency towards perfectionism kind of made her butt heads with people every once in a while. She is saying that she was a Virgo, and Virgos are like that. I don't know if that's true, but that is what she's offering. Yeah, and running. She really enjoyed running for exercise, being outside and pushing herself feels like marathons to me. I'm seeing like a big wheel, like one of those that kids can ride. I think this belongs to your son. Perhaps it was a gift from her. Oh, what is she saying? It stayed at her house. I think she had a safe driveway for it. Her message for you tonight is she wants to encourage your intuition and your spirituality. I think things have been a little challenging for you lately, and it's really influenced your outlook on things. And she hopes to have you hear this message that it can nudge you out of that a little bit. Always know that the universe is grander than any given situation, and things naturally change and evolve. And in the meantime, anything you can do to connect with the wonder of life and your own intuition with things. And she says that is much more your natural state. So just come home to yourself. She just loves you very much and wants to offer you her support. Feels like the two of you have a joke about wearing a crown. So don't forget to wear your crown. She loves you. Right? I think I'm going to leave it at that. If this message resonates for you, please reach out, because I do really love to hear. Thank you. Are you enjoying the podcast? Please leave a kind review or share it with a friend. These small actions take only a few moments, but they immensely help support the podcast. Thank you for supporting my work and the podcast. And with that, dear listener, we have reached the end of this episode of I Talk to Ghosts. I hope you've enjoyed my spirit work this evening. If it related to you, please reach out. And I also hope that you enjoyed the spooky, haunted, coffin ghost stories I shared with you. I never thought that this would be an experience that you could have, having an encounter with a haunted coffin. But if you have, oh my goodness, I would love to hear what happened. So please reach out. In the meantime, wherever you wander off to, in this world or the next, just remember, come back and visit with me. Have a lovely evening and good night.